and it woke me up. I mean, if you've got somebody you love, you better tell them, because things can happen in an instant to change your life.
Reba McEntire has carried that question for over 30 years, and the weight of it has never gotten any lighter.
First, of course, you don't want to even talk about it at all, which is the wrong thing to do.
It is the kind of question that haunts you in the middle of the night, the kind that makes you wonder if anything you have accomplished was worth the price you paid to get there.
And we worked hard, we played hard.
For most people, one tragedy of that magnitude would be enough to break them completely, to send them running from the spotlight and never looking back.
It crushed me. It made me realize how precious life is.
But Reba McEntire is not most people, and the 1991 plane crash that killed 8 members of her team was not the only time the Queen of Country wanted it all to end. Decades later, she would face another loss, one that cut even deeper than watching her entire band vanish in a single horrifying night.
5 minutes after the crash, there were still small fires burning. Even after dawn, the wreckage was smoldering.
This second blow struck at the very foundation of why she sang in the first place, and it made her question whether she should ever step on a stage again.
Help me have the strength to move one foot in front of the other to continue on with what I'm supposed to be doing.
Those words were not an exaggeration, and they were not spoken for sympathy or dramatic effect. She meant every single syllable, and both times she stood at that crossroads, someone had to step forward and convince her that the world still needed her voice. This is the story of what almost broke Reba McEntire, the tragedies that pushed her to the very edge of giving up, and the remarkable people who pulled her back from walking away from everything she loved.
And all I could think of was their mothers. How could you go through this? How are you going to see the next day?
Before Reba became the Queen of Country, before the sold-out arenas and the platinum records and the television shows, she was just a ranch girl from the dusty plains of Oklahoma. She was born on March 28, 1955, in the small town of McAllister, a place where cattle outnumbered people and dreams were often sacrificed to the demands of daily survival. Her father, Clark McEntire, was a 3-time world champion steer roper, a man carved from the same unforgiving landscape that surrounded their ranch, a man who believed that hard work was not something you chose, but something you owed to the people depending on you. Her mother, Jacqueline Smith McEntire, had dreams of her own, dreams that stretched far beyond the barbed wire fences and endless Oklahoma horizons. Jacqueline wanted to be a singer, wanted to stand on stages and feel the roar of applause washing over her like a wave, wanted to share her voice with audiences who would remember her long after the final note faded. But life in rural Oklahoma in the 1950s did not make room for such dreams, especially not for women, and Jacqueline set aside her aspirations for marriage, for children, for the endless demands of running a cattle ranch alongside a champion rodeo cowboy.
And we would sing just about anywhere we could.
But she never stopped believing in the power of music, and she never stopped teaching her children to love it the way she did. On long car rides across the flatlands of Oklahoma, with nothing but empty highway stretching toward the horizon, Jacqueline would lead her children in harmonies, teaching them to blend their voices until they sounded like a single instrument. She entered them in every talent show within driving distance, pushed them to perform at local events, and watched with fierce pride as they developed the skills she had never been allowed to pursue herself. People around the state started calling them the Singing McEntires, and everyone agreed that Reba was the one with something special, something that made you stop whatever you were doing and just listen. By the time she was 19 years old, Reba had developed a voice that could fill an arena without amplification and break your heart with nothing more than a whispered phrase. In 1974, she received the opportunity of a lifetime when she was invited to sing the national anthem at the National Finals Rodeo in Oklahoma City, the biggest stage she had ever stood on. The crowd fell silent as her voice soared through the arena, and sitting among them was country singer Red Steagall, a man who recognized raw talent when he heard it. He approached her after the performance with an offer that would change the trajectory of her entire life, promising to help her pursue a recording career in Nashville if she was willing to take the risk. Within a year, Red had helped her land a record deal, and Reba McEntire moved to Nashville to chase the dream her mother had given up decades earlier.
full of all the instruments, and then we'd go to these clubs and play from 9 to 1, and then we'd pass the hat to 1 to 3 and probably make about $10, $11 a piece.
But success did not come immediately, and for nearly a decade, Reba struggled in an industry that did not quite know what to do with her unique voice and fiery personality. She released songs that went nowhere, played to half-empty honky-tonks, and wondered if the sacrifices she was making would ever amount to anything more than disappointment. In 1976, at just 21 years old, Reba married Charlie Battles, a rodeo champion who was 10 years her senior and already had 2 sons from a previous marriage. At first, the relationship seemed like everything a young Oklahoma girl could want: a handsome cowboy who understood the world she came from, a partner who could share in the demands of ranch life while she pursued her musical ambitions. But as Reba's career slowly began to gain traction, as her name started appearing on charts and her face started showing up in magazines, something in Charlie began to curdle into resentment. He grew uncomfortable with the attention she received, threatened by a success that was clearly going to surpass anything he had achieved in the rodeo arena.
Things had already started dividing up in my mind. And so for him to go ahead and think that everything was still fine and dandy.
He became controlling, dismissive, and increasingly cruel in ways that Reba tried to hide from the outside world. He called her demeaning names in front of her band members, making her feel small for wanting something bigger than the life he could offer her.
Everything about him that made you so angry. He didn't get it.
Exactly. He didn't realize there was anything wrong.
The money she earned from her growing career somehow always ended up in his hands, and her dreams became sources of conflict rather than shared celebration.
Really, I wouldn't put up with it.
That moment of violence, that split second when her husband raised his hand with a shaving kit clutched in his fist, burned itself into her memory forever. She saw everything clearly in that instant: the future that awaited her if she stayed, the slow death of her dreams, the gradual erosion of everything that made her who she was. In 1987, after 11 years of marriage, Reba filed for divorce and left for Nashville with nothing but her determination and her talent. Charlie Battles would die in 2013 after suffering a stroke, but by then Reba had already built a life beyond anything he could have imagined for her. The late 1980s were a revelation for her, a period when everything she had worked for finally started paying dividends in ways she had only dreamed about during those lonely years on the Texas ranch. Free from a marriage that had been slowly suffocating her, she threw herself into her career with an intensity that shocked even the executives at her record label.
Getting to do the things we're doing now, I think I'm busier than I've ever been.
Hit after hit climbed the charts, each one cementing her status as country music's most exciting new voice, each one proving that her mother's faith in her had been justified all along. She remarried in 1989, this time to her manager Narvel Blackstock, a partnership that seemed to blend personal and professional life in ways that worked for both of them. They had a son together, Shelby, in 1990, and Reba assembled a touring band that was more like a family than a group of hired musicians. They traveled the country together, shared meals and jokes, and the particular intimacy that comes from spending hundreds of nights on the road chasing the same dream. These were people she trusted with her life, people she considered among her closest friends in the world. On March 15, 1991, they performed a private concert in San Diego for EBM executives, and everything went exactly as it should. The crowd loved them, the sound was perfect, and Reba felt that particular satisfaction that comes from knowing you have given an audience everything you have. But she had been fighting bronchitis for weeks, and her voice was starting to show the strain of relentless touring. While her band boarded a small jet to fly ahead to Fort Wayne, Indiana for their next performance, Reba decided to stay behind in San Diego and rest her voice for a few more hours. She was supposed to be on that plane, and a simple head cold was the only reason she stayed behind. In the early morning darkness of March 16th, the plane carrying 8 members of her team clipped a rocky outcrop on Otay Mountain, just 7 miles from the San Diego airport. The aircraft exploded on impact, scattering wreckage across the mountainside, leaving nothing behind but twisted metal and unimaginable grief. Her tour manager Jim Hammond, her bandleader Kirk Capello, her guitarist Chris Austin, her drummer Tony Saputo, her keyboardist Joey Siganero, her bassist Terry Jackson, her guitarist Michael Thomas, her backup singer Paula Kaye Evans, and both pilots, all gone in a heartbeat, all taken in a moment of catastrophic violence that made no sense and offered no explanation. The news hit Reba like a physical blow, something that actually knocked the breath from her lungs and left her unable to speak. These were not just employees, they were her friends, her musical family, people who had shared in her triumphs and supported her through her struggles. The guilt of surviving when they did not became a weight she would carry for the rest of her life, a constant companion that whispered questions she could never answer. Why them and not her? What was she supposed to do with a life that had been spared by something as random as a head cold? In the weeks following the crash, Reba McEntire retreated from public life in a way she never had before. The thought of standing on a stage without the people who had stood beside her felt not just difficult, but somehow disrespectful, as if moving forward would be a betrayal of their memory. She canceled shows, avoided reporters, and spent long hours trying to make sense of a tragedy that refused to offer any meaning or purpose. The music that had always been her refuge now felt hollow, a reminder of everything she had lost. But then Debbie Hammond, the widow of tour manager Jim, reached out with a message that cut through the fog of Reba's grief like a blade. Debbie told Reba that Jim would have kicked her butt if he thought for 1 second that she was considering quitting, that the last thing any of them would have wanted was for their deaths to silence the music they all loved so deeply.
And so after that, we had a strong talk about, from now on, you open my gift to you, and I'll open your gift to me.
It was a brutal piece of honesty, delivered by a woman who had lost her husband but understood that grief could not be allowed to destroy the living along with the dead. Then Dolly Parton called, and what she offered left Reba speechless. Dolly said that if Reba needed her band, her buses, her management team, anything at all to get back on the road, it was hers for the taking. No strings attached, no conditions, no expectation of repayment, just one artist extending a hand to another in the darkest moment of her life. They had been friends since the 1970s, communicating by fax because Dolly refused to use computers, and this offer proved that their bond went deeper than industry friendship. This was family looking out for family. Kenny Rogers offered her a role in his television movie The Gambler Returns, giving her something to focus on besides the crushing weight of loss and survivor's guilt. It was on that set, in 1991, that she would first meet an actor named Rex Linn, though at the time neither of them could have imagined how significant that meeting would become 3 decades later. Slowly, painfully, with the support of friends who refused to let her give up, Reba began to find her way back to the stage. She poured her grief into an album called For My Broken Heart, and something remarkable happened. The album became the biggest commercial success of her entire career, selling over 5 million copies and producing 4 #1 singles. The tragedy had not destroyed her. It had somehow transformed her into an even more powerful artist, one whose pain resonated with millions of listeners who had experienced their own losses. The album became proof that even the worst experiences can be transmuted into something meaningful, something that helps other people feel less alone in their suffering. For the next 2.5 decades, Reba's life seemed to exist on an upward trajectory that nothing could interrupt. Her marriage to Narvel Blackstock appeared solid from the outside, a partnership between husband and manager that produced consistent success in both her recording and acting careers. She launched her own sitcom, simply titled Reba, which ran for 6 seasons and introduced her to an entirely new audience who might never have listened to country music. She became not just a singer but a brand, a television personality, a beloved figure whose face appeared on everything from cookbooks to clothing lines. But in 2015, after 26 years of marriage, Narvel Blackstock sat Reba down and told her he wanted a divorce. The news blindsided her completely, shattering the sense of security she had built her life around and forcing her to confront a future she had never imagined.
The divorce was not my idea. I didn't want it in any shape, form, or fashion.
The divorce was not just personal, it was professional, because Narvel had been managing her career throughout their marriage. Separating from him meant untangling decades of business arrangements, renegotiating contracts, and essentially rebuilding her professional life from scratch while simultaneously processing the end of what she thought would be a lifetime partnership. She felt abandoned, scared, and more vulnerable than she had felt since leaving Charlie battles all those years ago. The settlement reportedly gave Narvel $47 million, a financial wound that added insult to the emotional injury of being left by someone she had trusted completely. Then, in 2020, another blow landed that made everything else feel insignificant by comparison.
You know, pulling out the Kleenexes, because that's something that when you go through it, you totally understand. And
Her mother, Jacqueline, the woman who had taught her to sing on those long Oklahoma car rides, the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams so that Reba could pursue hers, died at 93 years old after a battle with cancer. Reba had always understood that her mother was the reason she became a singer, the source of everything that had followed from that first national anthem performance at the rodeo. Jacqueline had been her biggest cheerleader, the voice in her head that reminded her why she did what she did. For the second time in her life, Reba stood at the edge of walking away from everything she had built. The woman who had given her music meaning was gone, and without her, the songs felt empty, the stages felt pointless, the applause felt hollow. What was the purpose of continuing when the person she had been performing for her entire life was no longer there to hear her? Her sister Susie reminded her that their mother would never have wanted her to stop, that the gift Jacqueline had nurtured was meant to be shared with the world, not buried alongside grief. But the decision to keep going was harder this time, because Reba was older now, more tired, and the losses had accumulated into a weight that felt almost impossible to carry. Something unexpected happened during the darkest period of Reba McEntire's life, something that would eventually lead her back to a joy she had stopped believing was possible. In the spring of 2020, just as the pandemic was shutting down the world and her mother was slipping away from cancer, Reba reconnected with an old acquaintance through a series of phone calls and text messages that gradually became something more meaningful. His name was Rex Lynn, an actor she had first met on the set of The Gambler Returns back in 1991, right around the time she was rebuilding her life after the plane crash. They had stayed in touch over the decades, trading occasional messages and running into each other at industry events, but the timing had never aligned for anything romantic. Both had been married to other people, both had been focused on their careers, and both had accepted that their friendship would remain exactly that. But now, 30 years after their first meeting, they were both single, both looking for something real, and both ready to give love another honest chance. What started as friendly phone calls during lockdown evolved into a genuine romance that surprised everyone, including Reba herself. She found in Rex something she had not experienced in her previous marriages, a partner who celebrated her success instead of feeling threatened by it, who supported her dreams instead of resenting the time they required, who made her laugh in ways she had forgotten she could laugh. After decades of relationships that had disappointed her in one way or another, Reba had finally found someone who seemed to genuinely want her to be happy. On Christmas Eve of 2024, Rex proposed, and Reba said yes without a moment of hesitation. The woman who had twice stood at the edge of giving up on everything had somehow navigated her way through the darkness to find a light she never expected. She still tours, still records new music, still lights up stages across the country with a voice that has somehow grown even more powerful with age. But now she does it with a partner who wants to be there, who understands what the music means to her, who sees the woman behind the legend and loves her anyway. Reba McEntire's story is not fundamentally about tragedy, even though tragedy has been woven through every chapter of her remarkable life. It is about what happens when you refuse to let the worst moments define who you are, when you find the strength to keep moving forward even when every fiber of your being wants to stop. She lost 8 people she loved in a single horrifying night and came within inches of walking away from music forever, but she found her way back because people who loved her refused to let her quit. She lost her mother, the woman who gave her singing its deepest meaning and once again stood at the edge of giving up. But she found a reason to continue because the gift her mother gave her was too precious to bury. At 70 years old, after 5 decades in one of the most brutal industries in the world, Reba is living proof that the best chapters of your life can come after the worst ones, that happiness is not something reserved exclusively for the young or the untouched by sorrow. She has earned every bit of the joy she feels today, paid for it with decades of hard work and heartbreak and the kind of losses that would have destroyed people with less resilience. But she is still here, still singing, still reminding anyone who will listen that it is never too late to find love and purpose and meaning. If you found this story inspiring, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories like this one. Reba McEntire's journey reminds us that even when we are ready to give up, there might be someone or something waiting just around the corner to give us a reason to keep going. Thank you for watching, and remember that the greatest comebacks in life often follow the deepest falls.